Jennifer Miller interviewing Douglas, known as Chubby Dorris, Sr., on November 23, 2002, at his home in Frisco on Sunset Strip. Tape 1. Okay, Mr. Dorris, you were just telling me about the sticky bottom down Hatteras Village, and that was...
That was from the old post office, where Midget Realty has the pink storage building, I think it is now. That was where the old post office was, and the highway, when the highway come in on the island, it stopped right there at the old post office in that general area.
Mm-hmm.
And from there on down, there was no paved road. Naturally, it was low land down there, still is, really. And they got the nickname of Sticky Bottom. In the wintertime especially, it was always, the ruts in the road were always covered with water, and there was always water down in that area.
Uh-huh.
So they called it Sticky Bottom. The old timers always had some kind of name for everything.
Right.
And everybody. I acquired the nickname of Chubby from my grandfather. My grandfather, Ramsey Gaskins. He was sort of one of the many town comedians that always joked and carried on and stuff like that. And when I was a baby, I was just a hefty baby, still hefty man, but he nicknamed me Chubby. And Chubby had been what I've been called all of my life. You could come ask for Douglas Dorris and they'd send you to my son, because but that's mainly where I was raised, down in there, and it, like I say, it was all swamp. There was a few houses, a few of the older houses, and some of them are still standing. But there wasn't much down there, and there was no work or nothing on the island. The tourist industry was just barely getting started, and you had a little bit 3 months a year. And the children in the neighborhood, our old schoolhouse in Hatteras, we went to school in the area about where the post office and the library and all that is. That was the area where our school was at.
Okay.
And the Boxington school hadn't been built.
When was this? When were you born? What's your birthday?
I was born on April 13th, 1943.
Okay.
And everybody went to school. There were no buses. You walked to school. There was no lunchroom. So everybody went home for lunch and come back. And, there was a few cars around, but not too many people had cars. Well, I mean, we wasn't in the horse and buggy age. We had the automobiles, but not too many people could afford them. So, couldn't afford to keep them running if they had them. So there was no money around, no work. The skin washing for the Coast Guard boys and things like that. But there just wasn't any work around here. And as a kid, to earn your extra spending money, or your spending money period, you would go to the docks in the summertime if they were catching any shrimp, and you'd get 2 cents a pound.
2 cents a pound.
After they were headed, not before, after.
And how many pounds could you do in a session?
Oh, gee, I was kind of slow. There was some of the older boys that were real fast at it, and they could make as high as maybe $5 in a day's time if there was plenty of shrimp around and they put in a long day. I mean, 2 cents a pound takes a lot of shrimp to make $5.
Yeah.
But that was a long day and a lot of shrimp. Most of the time, if they made $1 or $2, that was considered all right.
Sure, that's still a lot for 2 cents a pound.
Yeah, they had to work hard. But now there was some of the boys were real fast, and which I wasn't one of them. And in the wintertime, there was some small trawlers that worked out of here. Fraser Peel owned one, and Donald Oden, he owned one, and once in a while they would come in and they would have have a load of the blowtoads, and we would skin them.
Blowtoads, now blowfish?
Yeah, okay. You'd catch them on the beach today. Toadfish, we call them blowtoads. They would swell, you've probably seen them, call them the piers. And we would skin them for 5 cents a pound, if there was any around, if the fishermen caught them. See, it wasn't nothing steady or regular or nothing.
Sure, just whatever came along.
Whatever come along.
Hold on just a second here. Let me just check and make sure my tape is working. All right. What other kinds of fish were they catching when you were a kid?
Well, fishing has always run in cycles, and there was times down there where the pine netters and there was some haulers and stuff that they had a cycle like everything else that it run real good for so many years, and it seemed like the cycle changed and you couldn't make a living fishing around here. There's been several of them cycles over the years. Fish just take a different area, or who can explain it?
Sure.
You know? So, so the cycle dried up. They quit coming in here with shrimp.
And around what time did that happen?
Oh man, when I was a small boy, I guess probably when I was 10, 12 years old or something like that. It was up and down, you know. My grandfather was a commercial fisherman all of his life, and he started in the last years of his life. He had a about 30-some foot boat, and the name of it was Chubby. He named it after me.
Aww.
And he took inlet and sound charters out. The last few years of his life. Well, he wasn't physically able to fish anymore. He was getting older, and fishing had slowed down to where the men just couldn't make a living at it. So they would whatever they could. A lot of the men would leave the island and go off and get jobs on Corps of Engineer dredges, the old pilot boat. Now, that used to be, in fact, that was my first job. I went on there when I was 15 years old. On pilot boat Virginia and pilot boat Maryland they were up in Norfolk at Cape Henry, and a lot of people got jobs on them.
So you went there when you were 15?
Yeah.
Did you go with a group of people, or?
Well, there was a group from down here already working on there.
Okay.
And whenever somebody would quit, well, they'd send down this way, where there was so many from down this way working for them, and hire people from this area.
And what did you do?
Well, I started out on there as a mess boy. In other words, washing dishes, cleaning floors, swabbing bathrooms, commodes, like anything else. You start at the bottom, I guess, and that's where I started. And I stayed on there for a while, but the way it was back then, it got to where there was no work, no industry, no money to amount to anything. And when a person either quit school or graduated from high school, some of them come on up to Buxton after the school was built and finished school, and some of them come earlier than that. But, because the school in Hatteras, I believe, only went to like the 9th grade.
Okay.
And then if you continued to high school, you come to Buxton.
Okay.
Well, then when they built the new schoolhouse where it is now, they consolidated it all from 1st grade through 12th. But this all went through time.
Yes.
And there was no work, no money, so most young men, by the time they were 17 or so, either left and went into the military, or they went off and went into some sort of merchant marine thing, like on a pilot boat. They'd start there, and some of them would end up going to sea on ships. Some of them ended up on tugboats. I ended up on tugboats. And I'm retired from it now. But I don't know. There just wasn't nothing here for a young man to do. The Coast Guard bases were here, and they started building, the Seabees come in and started building a Navy base in Buxton. I don't remember the years that took place, but a lot of the young girls, all the men were leaving. And when they got married, they married Coast Guard or Navy boys, and then they left the island. There was nothing here for them to do, no jobs, no work. So that's pretty well the way it was. Not a boy, there just weren't nothing around here. I enjoyed every minute of it. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here now.
Right. Now you said you retired from the tugboat. Was that your career? Did you work?
Yes, I went from the pilot boat and started on tugboats. When I got married, they had finally started, the state had bought the ferry service going across to Ocracoke. I think they had 3 ferries down there, and then they had some ferries that naturally at Oregon Inlet. The bridge wasn't across. And I think the minimum wage had finally got to $1 an hour about that time. See, my son was born in '63, so in about 62 or 61, something like that. And I went to work with the state at $1 an hour, and then I was temporary, no benefits. You know, you had a job, and that was it. In fact, I had to go all the way to Oregon Inlet and work on the Oregon Inlet ferry until they could get
open. You
open.
went from Hatteras to Oregon Inlet to work?
Yep, until they could get opening down at Hatteras to where I could be closer to home.
Sure, and did you do that every day, or did you stay up there?
No, I'd go back and forth every day. There was several other people doing the same thing. And we'd get together and ride with each other and help out that way, you know. So, there's quite a few people that got jobs like that, but my first child, Douglas, was starting to come in the world, and, well, $1 an hour, and that's trying to pay rent and that sort of thing wasn't stretching too far, so I had to go back, you know, on a pilot boat. I quit the pilot boat, come home, and then I ended up going back. So we managed to survive and everything, but they just wasn't no money here. And the wife working, that was, forget it. Where was she going to work? You know,
down here.
Down here. And if you had children, there wasn't nobody around hardly. Well, I guess you could get a babysitter, but you couldn't afford one.
Sure.
You know, so cleaning motels, there were very few motels to clean, so them jobs were scarce. You know. Very few restaurants, so them restaurant jobs were scarce, and all the other stuff that's come along, it just wasn't here. So, like I say, you either went off and went to the military, or you went off and went to merchant marine. And most of the guys who done that, and then the women, the young girls, they married the service guys down here. Now, some of them married local people, and some of the men stayed and managed to make it fishing. But the majority of them, the bulk of them, had to leave home, had to leave.
Right.
And there were some that stayed and made it, but it was very few. So.
And when you went back to piloting after your son was born, did your whole family move to Virginia?
No. I always managed in my career to my wife and my children, and even we maintained our home right here in Hatteras. And did Hatteras, and then about 28 years ago moved up to Frisco. And in 1991 I bought this place here. But you'd work so many days on, and then you was off so many days. Well, the so many days that you was on, you lived right on the boat. You couldn't go ashore anyway. And when I went to tugboating, we was traveling quite a bit. So then I was working 20 days on and 10 days off. So on my 10 days off, I'd come back home. But the 20 days or so that I was gone, I was gone.
Sure. Did you have any way to contact your family from the boat at that time?
Well, there's very few phones around. And there was no such thing as a cell phone on the boat. If you did have an emergency, you had to go through the marine operator. And everybody in the world was listening to what you were saying because it was on a radio.
Right.
You'd stand there and talking, and everybody heard you, and what the other party said, everybody heard them, and that thing might be heard all up and down the coast.
Right.
So you didn't call your girlfriend. You know?
Right.
You didn't call your wife or girl unless it was an emergency. Write a letter. And there was a few phones started coming into the, area, and naturally, as you could afford them, people would get phones. But we're down in Sticky Bottom, where I grew up, I can remember where Lee Robinson's store had a phone, and Captain Myrtle Foster had a phone. And to my knowledge, now there might have been something I don't know, but there weren't no other phones in the whole area down there. Now, Captain Myrtle had the Albatross fleet, and he had to have a phone. And Lee Robinson's store had one.
Now, did the people go and use those phones when they needed a phone?
In an emergency, yeah, but there wasn't that many times that you needed to use the phone.
Sure.
Captain Myrtle, he had started the Albatross fleet, and there was people calling him, reserving trips. And that was his business that he'd got into. He couldn't make it commercial fishing anymore, so he had got into the charter business to try it at that, and it paid off. He done good at it, and his son's doing good today. Lee Robinson's store, well, you just didn't go say, I want to use the phone,
Sure.
If you needed to, yes, but, you just didn't impose that much. Well, you didn't have that much of a reading car anyway. Your clothes, most of the time, you'd order them out of Sears Roebuck. Your Christmas, birthday present, if you had the money, you would order it. The stores around would carry a certain amount of clothing, shoes, and everything, but material for people to make clothes. But it was a whole lot different than it is today.
Sure.
It's hard to do.
Now, you said your grandfather's Gaskins. What was his first name?
Lorenzi. Lorenzi Gaskins Sr.
Okay.
He's deceased now.
And who was his wife?
Well, his last wife was Lola Foster Gaskins.
Right. And, of course, that was your mother's parents.
Well, my grandfather was married twice. My mother was in the first part of the first marriage.
Uh-huh.
And he was married to Mary. The first time he was married to Mary Austin.
Okay. And that was your mother's mother?
That was my mother's mother.
Okay.
And she passed away, leaving my grandfather with 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then Granddaddy remarried to Lola Gaskins, and they had 3 children.
Okay.
And everything. So that was how that come in.
Sure. And what about your father's parents?
They're not from the island. My mother married a military man.
Okay.
And they were not from the island or nothing like that. So my mother, after her and my father, they got married during the war, after 1943. And he was a military man, and the marriage didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had to leave and go look for her work. There was none around here to help do what she could for, her children. And I stayed here with my sister and all, with my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she worked in Norfolk doing waitress work.
Okay.
Like I said, there was no jobs, no money around here.
And did she travel like you had done? Did she?
Well, after her and my father got married, stepfather got married, yeah. He's a Navy man who's retired now, and my mother's deceased. My father's still living up here. He's still alive and he's doing good. He's my father in my eyes because I don't remember my father, you know. And they were divorced, or they separated when I was 3 months old. When they got divorced, I don't know. Ain't no sense putting none of this in the paper.
Right. That's not.
That's
I don't need the personal stuff. I was just wondering as far as genealogy on the island goes.
Well, my genealogy comes from the Gaskins and the Austins.
Okay.
My grandmother, my biological grandmother, was an Austin. Her father was Harm Austin. He was a carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
There were very few of them around, but there were very few buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather, like I say, was Ramsey Gaskins. And he was a commercial fisherman. And one of his sons is still living up here, Ramsey Gaskins Jr., lives up here next to the Little Grove Methodist Church.
Now, is that Ramsey, R-A-N-S?
Well, it's originally spelled Low Ramsey, L-O-R-A-N-Z-I-E, or L-O-R-A-N-Z-Y.
Okay, well, that's close enough. I wanted to get it close there.
But somehow or another, now there's something else shows how their bookkeeping was. Little Ramsey, we call him, is a junior. But on his birth certificate, it's spelled R-A-N-Z-E-Y. But Granddaddy's was spelled L-O-R. And he's a junior.
Okay.
But back then, their bookkeeping and, short for Low Ramsey was Ramsey. Nobody ever called Granddaddy Low Ramsey. They always called him Ramsey.
Sure.
And so that's, I guess, how that happened. The midwife who delivered him wrote down on her papers Ramsey. So I guess that's how his birth certificate come out. But he's a junior, but him and Granddaddy's names are spelled different. They didn't have computers back then to straighten things out.
Now, was your son born on the island here?
My oldest son, Douglas, was born in Mattiel. There was no doctors down here whatsoever, other than at the Navy base there was a corpsman.
Okay.
But he wasn't going to take no maternity cases or nothing like that.
Sure.
So my wife was seeing Dr. Harvey. He would run a clinic in Mattiel, and he had a midwife's type nurse, Miss Jeanette Stowe's daughter. I believe her name was Etta. I was almost certain her name was Etta that worked for him.
Mm-hmm.
And when my wife went in labor, I carried her to Mattio across the ferry and everything else.
Wow.
And he was born there. Now my daughter Donna, when she was born here at home.
Mm-hmm.
In Hatteras Village, right in Sticky Bottom.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it'd been a long time since any children had been born on the island.
Mm-hmm.
But Dr. Burroughs, the medical center where it is now, used to be an old girls club,
mm-hmm.
and it was owned by the community. So they donated the land to build a medical center.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they started building the medical center, and was about complete, and Dr. Burroughs come down here from Norfolk and started practice in his house, a little place next to his house, which
mm-hmm.
was right across the road. And he was taking some maternity cases. Well, my daughter's always been, you know my daughter Donna.
Yes, I know her.
You know her, bless her heart. But she come early, and the building wasn't ready. So I got up the road that morning and got a hold of Dr. Burroughs, and him and, well, his nurse, Mrs. Stevens, her name was. I'll never forget her, bless her heart, she was a good woman.
Mm-hmm.
They come right to the house. We were living in a house trailer just south of Lee Robinson's store on the main road. And they delivered her right there in that trailer.
Wow.
And Donna's, but I'll tell you, she might get mad with me. But Donna's 37. So,
what was the nurse's name again?
Mrs. Stevens. Mrs.
Oh, Mrs. Okay.
Mrs. Stevens. She was a single woman, divorced woman or whatever. But we always called her Mrs. Stevens.
Sure.
But she was a nice lady, and she come down here as Dr. Burroughs' nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I think they knew each other from their work in Virginia,
mm-hmm.
Norfolk General. I think she worked at King's Daughters or something.
Mm-hmm.
But she was a real good nurse. And she come down here about the same time that Dr. Burroughs did, and they started the practice. But like I say, the hospital wasn't ready when Donna got ready to come in the world.
Sure.
So she was born right in Sticky Bottom. In fact, she still talks about it. She was the last baby to be born in Sticky Bottom, I guess.
So were there any midwives working at that time anymore? Or
no. There was the last midwife that I can remember anything about, and I don't remember when she was doing midwife work, but was Miss Jeanette Stowe. Mm-hmm. She lived in Sticky Bottom. Her husband's name was Irv Stowe. He was a boat builder. And Miss Jeanette, I think that her thing, there was over 300 babies that she delivered right here on the island. She had records of every one of them, too, believe it or not. She really did. But it was quite... Things were different, I tell you.
I wonder if those records are around anymore. I'm sure they probably are.
I'm sure they probably are, but which one of her children? She had a bunch of children. Some of them are still living, some of them are deceased. But one of her sons that are still living, and he's in his 90s, is Mr. Preston Stowe in Boxington. He's about 90, but he's still living. How his mind is, I haven't talked with Preston in years. I don't know how his mind is now, but he's in his 90s, and he's still getting out about it, so...
Sure.
Still getting around.
Maybe I'll have to go have a chat with him.
Mr. Preston was, he's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
There's some more people that are still living that are very old. Mr. Elwood Tolson, up here on Piney Ridge Road. His wife passed away a few years ago, Miss Rena. But Mr. Elwood, I think, is about 90. And they remember when there was cattle roaming through the woods and all that.
Is there anyone else you can think of that's up there that might be around that would be, maybe I could talk to? I talked to Miss Ruby Williams in Avon. She's 90.
Well, now, Mr. Raymond Basket. He used to be the deputy sheriff here on the whole island. Now, I understand he's getting feeble, but I guess his mind, I haven't talked to Raymond in a long time. He don't get out anymore like he used to. His wife, Sandra, But he lives up way back in there past the water plant, where the water plant is.
Oh, really?
You know where Tracy
I
Austin?
live on Lullaby Lane, and I go hiking back there.
Okay, you know where that big house Tracy Austin built, him and his wife, all the way back?
I know the big house that has like a trampoline in the yard back past the water plant.
Way back there, right there.
Not the one
Setting
you
up
mean?
on it. Oh,
yeah.
Okay,
really
Raymond's got a smaller place just right alongside of it.
Oh, okay.
But him and his wife's name is Sandra. But his mine, and he used to be the deputy sheriff around here. In fact, this house right here that I own right now come from the Bassnett family.
Okay.
And his brother Dewey Bassnett and his father. His father Dewey. Oh, Mr. Dewey's father. Well, his cemetery over there. I tell you what his name is. But he. In this Bassnett area is where he grew up. So I'm sure he grew up in this area all that through here.
Yeah, I have to call him.
But and Mr. Elwood, now I know Mr. Elwood's mind is still good.
Okay.
And he gets out. He has several children, most of which still live on the island. But now my youngest son, Wally, when he was born, now Wally's 34. He was born in Elizabeth City, in the hospital. But Dr. Burroughs had to quit taking maternity cases. Well, at one time I think he had a problem with some woman giving birth and they didn't have the blood or something. And it scared him to the point that he wouldn't take a chance anymore.
Sure.
He only delivered children here for a short while. And then he just, I guess when he seen that, it was too big of a chance and everything. I guess there's a difference between a midwife and a doctor. A midwife, if something does go wrong, it happens and it's sad. With a doctor, it still happens and it's sad, but you can get sued.
Right, right.
So maybe that's his reasons. I have no idea what his reasons were. But it stands to reason nowadays. Everybody's suing everybody. So.
Sure, that makes sense. Yes.
But no, there's been a lot of changes since I was a boy down here, and all this progress that we've got right now, we needed the tourism. It's the only industry Dyer County as a whole had to look forward to. And there's people, well, like all three of my children today have opportunities that they can work and stay here on the island and be with their family, and they do. And at night they go home and they go home to their family. Whereas when I was coming up, you couldn't do that. Without the tourism, I mean, it's what its bad parts. Now you have. And I'm almost afraid maybe it's going too far now with some of this overbuilding. But you can't stop progress, and a lot of people cuss it and all that, but at the same dang on time, where would we be without it?
Right.
You got to take the bitter with the sweet or whatever. That's just like the Park Service. I've heard a lot of the old timers run the Park Service time. If it wasn't for the Park Service, you wouldn't be able to go on that beach because it would be owned by private individuals who would not allow it. So they bought good as well as bad. I mean, hey, everything has a. So I don't know. We see all this progress going on. I just wonder when it's going to stop. But and sometimes I cuss it. But at the same time, how would the people around here survive? I'm thankful. I had to leave home to make a living for my family, and my children grew up with me being gone. And I couldn't be the father I wanted to be or should have been because I couldn't make a living here. Now it's different. My children are raising their children because they go home in the evening. And whereas if it hadn't been for the tourism and the building industry and stuff like that, they wouldn't be able to. They'd had done something I did, and some of them moved away and never come back. A lot of people that I knew when I was a kid have left the island, and other than visits, they've never come back. And that's sad.
Yes, it is.
That's sad. So I don't know. It's the overbuilding we're faced with today. A lot of people are raising a lot of cane about it, and in some respects, I can agree with them. I go along with them in some respects. But if some of them have a short memory. and some of them wasn't here. They're implants, I call them. They come in from outside to start with. They don't know what it was like before tourism got here.
Right.
So let's weigh it all out and
sure.
See just, I mean, there got to be a happy medium somewhere.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I don't like seeing all these houses. I don't like seeing these trees cut down and buildings going up and stuff like that. I'm not for all that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's bringing work to people. You don't hear of unemployment here on the island like you hear away from here. In fact, they got to bring help in. There's so much work.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere down, there's a fine line somewhere as to where people are going to have to say, well, now. And I find that the ones that are raised in the motel are the ones that wasn't born and raised here to start with.
Right, that makes sense.
And you better not put that in your paper either.
That's okay, yeah. I mean, this isn't meant to be a tell-all thing, but the general idea of what you expressed there is a good thing.
It is. Most of the hell raising, well, say for instance, when they were trying to get Frisco zoned. Now, I can see where zoning has got a lot of good points. There's a lot of things that it helps. But there's a lot of things it don't. So the majority of the local people who were here in Frisco a long, long time was against it. Well, leave them alone. That's the way, But the ones that were for it were mostly people who had moved in here from other places.
Mm-hmm.
And the part that really tires you up is when they first moved down here, they talk about such a beautiful place. Oh, we got to get away from where we live. We can't wash our car in our yard. We can't do this. We can't do that. Y'all have it so peaceful. They moved down here and they're not here 6 months. They try to get ordinances passed and everything where it'd be just like it was up there.
Sure.
Well, if that's the case, damn it, going back up there.
Right.
But not for that in your book either.
When were they trying to get Frisco zoned?
Oh, that happened. That's happened several times in the past. I'm going to say the past 10 years, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
That 10, 12 years. That's happened several times. There have been meetings. One was at Little Grove Methodist Church. They've had a couple at the schoolhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way the county commissioner put it, the last time that it was bought and they turned it down, they almost were like, you bunch of dumb locals don't want it, then the heck with you. It's more or less the impression they give you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some people want to be left alone, some don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like the tourism that's moving in. Some people are against it, some people are for it. Me, I don't want to see it get out of hand, but it's already out of hand. There ain't nothing you can do to stop it, but at the same time, where would we be without it?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to have a fine line there, and you ain't going to make everybody happy regardless of what you do. So.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit more about your growing up here down in Sticky Bottom. You said your grandfather was a fisherman.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of fishing did he do? Well,
he shrimped with his boat. He shrimped. He got a picture in there of his boat. And in today's fashion, it wasn't much of a boat, but back then it was all he had. And he done some long hauling.
Mm-hmm.
He pine netted. Well, just a general fisherman. Anything he could do to make a dollar.
Sure.
Along in the last few years of his commercial fishing, they started crabbing around here, crab potting, and he done some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was when crab potting first started, around here.
When was that?
Crab potting has been around here, I guess they've been crab potting 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, there was no market for crabs down here. It's one thing, it took so long to get them off the island with the ferries and stuff, they'd be dead time they got to the markets.
Sure.
And they couldn't handle them. So they finally did start getting some markets for people to crabbing, and crabbing brought some money, believe it or not, over the years. There's been some money made around here crabbing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's about over with now because the cycle has changed and there's not enough crabs to keep people employed,
Sure.
So, but Granddaddy, he fished and done any kind of it. And on the last, now, like I say, the chartering business was slowly coming around. 3 months a year was all it was. And didn't have the long seasons like you got now. You had the 3 months out of the year. And he was taking half-day parties down around the inlet. And they would usually flounder, bluefish, mackerel, spots, things like that. I mean, some people wanted to go offshore for the big fish, and some people just wanted fish to eat, you know, to carry back. So he got into it, and he done that until he passed away.
When did he start doing the charter business?
Oh, man, I wouldn't even know. I guess I was probably grown and married before he ever started into that, or maybe, well, maybe I wasn't married. Maybe it was before I got married.
So it was in the 60s then, would you say?
Yeah, yes. I'd say in the 60s. Early 60s, maybe.
Okay.
But, yeah. So, no, I kind of...
Did they catch crabs with nets just for food around
Well,
stuff?
a lot of people around here wouldn't eat them.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of people... Well, that's like your dolphin that they catch offshore, and saying a lot of your offshore fish. I've seen them lay on the dock and rot if the parties, when the charter fishing started, if the parties didn't want them. I've seen them lay on the dock and rot. There was no market for them commercially, and local people didn't want them. They weren't fishy enough. They were too bland, too mild.
They just didn't want to eat them?
No, they didn't want to eat them because they were just too mild of a fish. Most of your old folks, you'll find, in fact I do, most of your old folks around here like a fish that tastes like fish.
Like, which ones would that be?
Well, a bluefish, spot, a mullet. They've got a fishy taste. And a lot of your other stuff that, like a flounder, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, and people love flounder, what it sells for, they must. But a flounder is for people who don't like fish. It don't taste like, it don't have no fish flavor. It's too bland, it's too mild. In my opinion. Now, everybody don't have the same opinion. You know?
Right. Well, today's about your opinion on this.
Yeah, there you go.
And the local people didn't want to eat the crabs either? They didn't get them for their own food?
No, in fact, I understand now. I can remember when I was a kid eating plenty of shrimp. Had shrimp anytime we wanted them, but during the season. But I understand that there was a lot of the old folks back before I can come in the world and all that wouldn't eat shrimp.
Really?
It was just like my grandfather used to tell me, they had some funny ways, and but like if you had seafood, like shellfish, clams, or oysters, not to eat anything sweet for at least 12 hours, like a candy bar or ice cream or anything like that, because it would poison you. I was told that when I was a kid all my...
Wow. So if you ate any kind of shellfish, don't eat any candy or sweet?
If we had clam chowder or clam fritters or oyster stew or fried oysters or something like that, no, sir, you don't eat nothing sweet. Like a piece of cake or a cookie or something.
Right.
And they say, that poison you. You know, and that was some of the old ways.
That was just superstition,
Superstition would be the right word, yeah. That would be the right word.
Can you think of any more superstitions like that they had?
Oh, my. Shoot. I used to, when I was a boy, well, like on a Saturday, most of the time when Granddaddy was hauling, up in the general area about where Willis Landing is now, is where his net scaffold, and they tied their boats up and everything. And Saturday, there was always net mending day. The men who fished mended nets, and on Saturday, they pull them off the boats, mend them up, put them back, lime them. Nobody fished on Sunday. That was one thing was a no-no. You didn't fish on Sunday. Period. You don't care what's going on, you don't fish on Sunday. Well, I would go up there and fill net needles to make enough money to go to the theater. We had a theater. Well, it was Shank Austin owned the theater, which was right across from where the library is now. I think Don Scapel owns the property now. Andrew Austin's property. There was a store there.
Is it the same building where the thrift shop has been down
The same building was the store. Now, just north of it, you see that kind of like a vacant lot there?
Yeah.
There's some concrete there. And you can still see the concrete where it went up, like almost, it wasn't steps, but it was like Well, that was how you went into the theater.
Oh, okay.
And the theater now is part of Durant Motor Court.
Okay.
Coming north, it's right next to the long two-story building that high with a flat roof.
The sandbar and grill.
No, on the right, coming north on the right-hand side.
Oh, okay.
Across from the sandbar.
Oh, okay. Sure.
But that building used to be the theater.
Okay, it was moved there?
Then when they done away with the theater, Mr. Shank moved it out there, and they set it up as part of a motel there. He owned all that.
Okay.
And the motel business, I guess, was getting better than the theater business. It only cost us $1 to go to the movie.
Oh.
So, and we had good movie to us. And the store where the thrift shop is was Mr. Andrew Austin's old store, which was Shank's father.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't sell any refreshments or concessions or anything in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
So your drink, your candy bar, or whatever you could get, you bought with that from Mr. Andrews' store, and you went to the movie. You carried it over with you when you went. Things were a whole lot different.
You were telling me about, was it mending the nets that you were helping do?
Well, I would just put the twine in the needles. I wasn't old enough, knew enough about it. Yeah.
Okay,
I would just thread the needles.
How much did they pay you for that?
Well, my grandfather that was my money for going to the show, and my dime to go to the store. He'd give me $0.25 for the movie and 10 cents to go to Mr. Andrews to get me a drink. And you could buy a drink for a nickel. Mm-hmm. And get you a bag of peanuts or something like that. We used to take them salted Planters peanuts, pour in our Pepsi, and shake them all up together. That was bad going around kids, you know.
Yeah.
But we, that was our way of life. One story I'll tell you that I never forgot. In fact, my grandfather was the kind of person, he never would give you a whipping, but he could say some things to you that he used. He was a wonderful person, I'll tell you. He had ways that, but I got up that morning on Saturday morning and started up to where they were mending net. Well, Granddaddy naturally had already gone. He was probably up by 5 o'clock that morning. Mm-hmm. So I got up and got my breakfast, and I went up there, and I had on an old pair of cut-off dungarees and no shirt, because when I got through helping him mend them needles, I'd probably go swimming in the creek, which the kids did. And on the way out, right there where the Hatteras Community Cemetery is now, there was an old woman named Miss Julia Oden. She had a big home there, and there was an old casket house on the corner where they built caskets. Her husband did before he passed away. That was coming out of there. That's how you went back to our house, was down that road, Poacher Lane. So I got along in there, and Miss Julia hollered at me and wanted to know if I wanted to make a quarter. So naturally I said, well, yes. Well, I was figuring as a kid in the top of my head, I was going to make that quarter in about, 15, 20 minutes. And then I'd go up there and I'd make another quarter and a dime too. Well, it didn't work out that way. She wanted me to get her a big pan of figs. She had big fig trees in her yard. So I climbed up there in that fig tree, and I mean to tell you, that sunshine and that fig juice and everything, it will make you, it'll burn you up. It'll give you a rash. It'll burn you up. Time was going by, and I wasn't paying no attention to the time. Time I got that big old wash pan full of figs, you don't do that in 10 minutes. And give it to her, and she gave him a quarter. I started on up the road. Well, when I did, I met my grandfather. He was coming home for his dinner. It was dinner time. He wouldn't know where I'd been, and he looked at me, and I was covered with the rash, the sun, and that juice from the figs. Well, it on your bare skin, it'll burn you up, especially a kid. I mean, you got tender skin. Well, I had to tell him. And he looked at me, he said, son, don't I always give you a quarter to go to the movie with on Saturday when you come up there and help us with them net needles? I said, yes, sir. And that was all he said. I mean, he just left it at that. And that's all he had to say. I was young, but I was old enough that I mean, he was letting me know, hey, you didn't have to do that. Now, you knew you had a job up there to do, and you were supposed to be up there to do that job, not Miss Julia's food. You were supposed to be up here filling them net needles.
Yeah.
It was a learning experience. It was a learning experience. And he done it, bless his old heart, without raising his voice, or taking a strap, or he got that point across, and he never mentioned it again as long as he lived. That was the end of it. So
Yeah.
Gracious, a lot of changes.
What other kinds of odd jobs were there available? You said about the shrimping, heading shrimps and helping with the net, threading the needles. People just kind of give you little things here and there anytime?
Well, no, they wasn't that much. There wasn't enough money around for that, like going out and cutting people's grass. Them jobs wasn't around because people didn't have the money to hire you.
Right.
And most time there was enough children in their household. Every house usually had a big family that they was taken care of anyway. But as far as the little menial jobs that the kids can do today, you know, it just wasn't here. And when you went to the fish house to work, you had to be a man to do that kind of work. Well, the boy couldn't do it. They didn't pack the fish back then in like the 50-pound cardboard containers like they do today. Yes and no. I mean, they started off when I was a small kid. Now, Mr. Willard, he died, and his fish house, you know, he went out of business. Because the fish houses are about like the fishing cycle. When there's plenty of fish, there's plenty of fish houses. When the cycle changes, there ain't plenty of fish, there ain't plenty of fish houses.
Sure.
You know. And Mr. Frazier, he ended up closing his down. And it got down to where there was only two, which Mr. Herbert Oden was still buying fish, and Mr. Donald Oden was still buying fish.
And was that located at the present-day Oden's Dock?
Oden's Dock, yep. In fact, both the two places, Oden's Dock has now acquired the land where Mr. Herbert Oden used to have his. It was Morris Burke's old place. And it's all involved in where Oden's Dock is now, yeah. In fact, Mr. Fraser Peel's fish house was in that same area. And Mr. Charlie Valance's fish house was in that same area.
So they were all right there together?
Yeah, more or less. They were separate, but it was more or less in the same area.
And did they compete, or did they not have to do that?
No, they didn't do that. They'd run back and forth talking to each other, and if one fish buyer would say, let's pay 2 cents a day, that's what they all paid.
Right.
In fact, they still do that today, only on the telephone. They didn't compete. Say, well, I'm going to pay more to him and this, that, and the other, because they knew you had to sell it to them.
Right.
I mean, where were you going to go with it? You know? So why fight among yourselves? Let's all make $1, you know?
Yeah.
So the fish buyers, and they still do it today, they'd get together, they knew how much they were going to pay, and most of the time, what one paid, there might be a little bit of difference in later years, but when they did, it was just very few. They all, at the end of the year, you shook it up and it come out the same.
Right.
Them buyers had their heads together, and they still do. That's been going on since the beginning of the time, and it's not going to change.
Right.
So, yeah, that's been a lot go on. I only wish that, and when, you know, I left the island to go to work, and I had to make a living, but I wish I had the opportunities then that the young people have today. The sky's the limit with young people today here on the Outer Banks as far as work is concerned. The fishing today is starting to get into another bad cycle, but that's just here within the last few years. It come back. And they went many years that fishing was real good. In fact, I come home and tried it myself. I come off the tugboats and so I could be home with my children. But today, well, I have 2 sons. Wally, he's working doing contract carpenter work. And he don't have to worry about work.
Right.
I mean, my other son, Douglas, he works for Coastal Concrete in Buxton. He don't have to worry about work. In fact, he's got side work when he's not working with Coastal, messing with concrete and, you know, stuff like that. The opportunities today are unlimited, and you can get a good education today. You can get into real estate. Well, like my daughter and her husband, they have several businesses, and they work hard, both of them, very hard. They've got K Point Exxon, they've got the Cool Wave, they've got their house rentals. I mean, they have really worked hard and put a lot of effort into it, and it wasn't given to them. I mean, they worked for it because I didn't have no money from them to get them going. I know that for a fact.
Right.
And I really don't think that Jarvis's parents had it. So the opportunity's there. I mean, they didn't have a big family. You know, you hear a lot of people say, well, his or her family left them a bunch of money and that's how they got started. Well, it's not that way with them. And if they can do it, anyone else can do it too. The opportunity's here.
Right.
And a lot of people are taking advantage of it, but there's so many that are not taking advantage of it. There's jobs down here with the state that are available. There's jobs with the Park Service that are available. Them jobs have all got benefits and retirement and stuff like that with it. They were never here before, you know. And when they did come around, there was very few jobs involved. The economy didn't, you know, they didn't harvest so many people. And it really saddens you a lot of times. That's some other things you see in the world, to see how the opportunity is here and they don't want to take advantage of it. Some people don't, and there's others that do. You can look around and see some that have done right good for themselves. I use my daughter and her husband as an example because I see them every day, you know. But they're not the only ones.
Sure.
You know.
They're a good example, though.
Yes, they are.
I didn't realize, is Donna married to Jarvis?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
I hope they are. They've got a 16-year-old son. If they're not.
I don't know them that well. I only know them to, you know, say hi to them a little bit around town.
They've got a 16-year-old boy. If they're not married, doggone, they ain't pulled the wool over me in a long time.
That's funny.
But no, that's just an example of people who are taking advantage of it while it's here, because, you know, time is going to tell you that. Opportunity's not going to always be here. I mean, you might, the economy goes, the stock market, the economy, we don't know what tomorrow brings. And if you don't get it while it's here, it ain't going to be here. Well, I didn't get it while I had the chance, and actually I can look back and see, you know. But I couldn't stay home, and that's the part that's sad to me. The opportunity's here. They can do it. They don't have to go off and go to work to make a living. They don't have to go in the military unless they want to. And there's nothing wrong with military life. But the sky's the limit if they just reach out and grab it. And I see so many of them around who just don't want to reach out there. And I've done sit here and watch my life go by, so to speak. And I'm happy with what I got. But I didn't have the opportunities they've got today either.
Right.
So I don't know. Back when I was a boy, there just weren't no opportunities. That's it. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. They just wasn't here.
Do you remember any kind of industries that were here when you were a child that aren't around anymore at all?
Oh.
As in things that they would produce, or...
There never has been anything here as far as producing anything.
And I mean anything, like, were they still harvesting seaweed or Yopon tea or any of that when you were a boy?
No, the Yopon tea has always been, I can't remember it being harvested and sold, but I can remember some of the old timers, especially up around the Avon area, who used to make it for their own use.
And did they make it in Avon that you know of?
Well, they used to, so I've been told. I've never actually seen it happen, but it was sort of like a delicacy that they liked and they wanted themselves. It wasn't something, I mean, it was just something that some of the old folks liked. They like the fish that they like the strong, fishy fish. Well, they like the Yopon tea. And not only in Avon, I think it was, from what I can understand, I've never drank it. But I've heard the stories about it, you know.
Right.
But as far as the industry, well, we had it, things were a whole lot more peaceful and a whole lot quieter. But at the same time, no, we had no industry. There's nothing ever come here that created work. Oh, there was things like putting in the highway.
Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, when the highway, you'd have contractors and state workers come in, and they would do it, and then they'd be gone. The Park Service at one time had a bunch of men hired than they have today. They were installing sand fences to build into dunes. Well, once they got that completed, so to speak, to where it's just maintenance and, you know, stuff like that, they done away with them workers, but they went to doing other things, you know. Like I say, the fish houses, the work that used to be here then, even in its best boom, didn't employ the amount of people that they have in recent years. Of course, now that's going downhill because fishing's going downhill.
Right.
But,
were there any styles of fishing that were around that they don't use anymore?
well, they had different, well, they didn't have the equipment then that they've got now for fishing. Today, the boats that are fishing, they've got all the modern electronics. They've got machines that'll help them before they even set their nets. They know there's fish under them. And the old folks, they had to go by smell, oil slicks, birds, things like that.
Well, tell me about that a little more.
Well, they would, if they were, well, like now in the wintertime you have what they call the sink netters.
Sink netters?
Sink netters, they call themselves. Drop netters. Drop netters, they call them. They've got the reels on the back of the boat and stuff like that. Well, back then they didn't have no reels for the back of the boat. It was all done by hand. And so they didn't put it away. And they had the old cotton nets, and then they had nylon come along. But the monofilament and stuff hadn't even been thought of. And when they went fishing, when they set their net, a lot of times it was guesswork. Of course, the old-timers had ways of knowing that they weren't going to tell nobody. They had their own little secrets, you know.
Do you know any? Like your grandfather's secrets? You said oil slicks on the water and
like
smell.
you see, you'll see some certain kinds of fish will slick, especially if like bluefish when they're going in and cutting up bait, when they're beaten. A bluefish, you'll see them slick on the water, and then what they're doing, they're biting the menhaden and the fatbacks. They're chewing them up, and when they chew them up, the oil comes out from them.
Oh, okay.
So that gives them an idea that there was
a little oil slick on the surface.
That's right.
Okay.
And you would see birds diving sometimes. That was another sign that they went by. And they would hope that sometimes there wasn't fish under them. Sometimes it was just some fish had done gone through, and the slick was there, and the fish had done gone.
Right.
You know, I mean,
What about smells?
They would smell the fish sometime, yeah.
Oh, you could smell it? From, like a big school of fish, you could actually smell it on the surface?
Yeah, and I've seen that even today, you can smell them. But, I mean, it's not something that happens every time. It's just a certain type of fish, whether they're feeding or not.
What kinds of fish do you know?
Most of the time, a bluefish will cut up the most. Bonita and albacore and stuff like that will do it, too. But what they do, they'll go into the menhaden and they'll start feeding onto them. And when they're biting them and chewing them up, the menhaden is an oily fish anyway, so that puts out a sort of slick. And they would smell that and go look for it, you know. They would smell it. It would smell fishy to them.
Sure,
you know?
yeah. Can you think of anything else that they used for signs of fish?
They had certain areas where they had known that fish would accumulate or use. They had certain areas they knew where to go. And the fish wasn't always there. I mean, it wasn't something, every time we go there we catch fish.
Right.
But they had certain areas that they had caught fish in the past. And they still do that, but now they've got, like in the ocean, they've got machines, Lorans and stuff like that, GPSs. They ain't got no guesswork in where that area is at. They can turn that machine on and take them right where it's at.
Right.
Well, back then they had a compass and sense of direction. They didn't have a radar if the weather was bad and it got foggy and they couldn't see nothing. They, you know, had to do a lot of laying around, wait till it cleared up, they could come in and stuff like that. So.
Were there a lot of men that died fishing a lot more? Was it more hazardous that way?
Oh, it was more hazardous, but I never knew of a whole lot of people getting killed fishing. They was pretty, it happened, yeah.
Right.
But it happened today with all the modern. But it wasn't no big abundance of it. It was so dangerous, not in the area of fishing in this area. Now, in other parts of the country, I understand up north and even on the west coast, it happens quite a bit. But around here, it wasn't that dangerous. They pretty well watched their weather, and they could look at a barometer, some of the old-timers and tell a little bit more than what the weather forecasters could.
Right.
Because they studied the barometers, they watched their barometers, that's how they made their living. It was the only way they had to predict it, you know.
Did they have any other weather predicting tricks that you know about?
They used to, and I know we used to do it on the tugboats too, they lived by the barometer. I've seen my grandfather, from time I was a boy right on up to a grown man, walk by his barometer and tap it. Gently. He wouldn't hit it, he just gently tapped it. And that was to let him know, you know, if that thing was, if it was kind of hung up or something like that, and if it was, you know, if it's falling, you know the weather's going to go one way, if it's rising, you know it's going to go another way. And your meteorologists use that quite a bit too, but only in a more modern form.
Sure.
But Granddaddy would always, and I do it to mine today. He's always, when you go by that barometer, especially if you're time of year you're expecting bad weather, you tap that thing and make sure it wasn't hung up or stuck or nothing like that. Just gently tap it. But that's the only way they had of figuring out their weather. They didn't have the marine forecasts and stuff like that. When they did get a good marine forecast, it would come over to the radio. And some of them, you know, they'd listen to that. You might get the darn forecast from Chicago.
Right.
Or something like that, you know.
Sure.
You didn't have the local updates and stuff like that. Now, some of your big old marine radios had them, the single sideband radios, to where you could get a forecast off of them, and you still can some of them. But there wasn't that many single sidebands around here back then either, you know. And they had the Weather Bureau. It was down to Hatteras, right there next to the Burris Red and White. And they would put the flag, you know, they'd take what data that they had sent to them, and they'd put the flags up for small craft and stuff like that. But there wasn't no such thing as turning that VHF on and getting updates and, you know, when it's, you know, like it is today.
Well, what was it like when you did get a big storm? Do you remember any real big storms?
Well, everybody didn't run off the island and evacuate. You just, some people would go to the Boxington area if they had friends or family or something up there, but most people just batten down and weather it out. You didn't, nowadays they want more people and more chance of damage, I guess, but they want everybody out of here and stuff like that. It's a safety precaution, and it's a good precaution. But back then, you'd find out a hurricane was coming, and you kept an eye on your barometer and listen to your radio as much as you could and get what you could out of it. And a lot of the places had shutters. They would board up and pull the doors to, lock everything up, and everybody just stayed in the house. If you had electricity in your house, you'd make sure you had plenty of kerosene for your lamps, because you knew you weren't going to have no lights.
Right.
And you just batten down weather it out. That was it.
Sure. There was no real predicting about the way the storms were going to go?
No, and there were some houses and stuff that got damaged. But I don't remember, in my lifetime, in my childhood, I don't remember anything ever coming through here that killed a bunch of people. Oh, sure, we've had damage, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't remember any storms or hurricanes, I'm talking about in my lifetime, that people's house got blowed off and people got drowned and killed and stuff like that. I don't remember that happening, not in my lifetime. I mean,
sure.
We always fared all right, and everybody in the neighborhood, when it was over with, us kids would get out and play with each other, and we were all still there.
What about fires? Did you have a firehouse?
There wasn't any firehouse, not when I was a boy coming up, no. Now, my grandfather's old home, the old Tom Angel home, it burnt down. And he built another house in the same area, in the same spot. And that house caught a fire. It was a chimney fire. And I was just a baby. My mother said I was upstairs in the crib when it happened. Well, the only thing that they done, all the men got together and grabbed their buckets and done what they could. You know, the men, probably the women, or anybody that was able to tow the bucket and throw water on it, but the house burnt to the ground. But there was no fire fighting equipment or nothing like that. Maybe some of the Coast Guard lifeboat stations or something like that might have had them. But it was pretty, well, nothing to brag about. If they had anything, it wasn't nothing that, you know, I think the buckets was the bucket of water.
They always just did a bucket chain, was it?
Yeah, that was, we didn't...
I smoked too.
No, it was,
Thanks. When did the Firehouse come in?
Oh, dang on, I guess it was, I'm going to say in the 60s. I'm not real sure on the dates now on this.
Sure,
you could,
generality.
It was, I want to say in the 60s. Yeah, I'm going to say in the 60s. The Hatteras Fire Department is the one I remember coming in. And it wasn't nothing but, they put the patrol station down there where the sheriff department is.
Mm-hmm.
When they closed up the schoolhouse and everything, they started changing all that around, putting in community buildings and post office there and all that, because the land, I understand, belonged to the community.
Mm-hmm.
But they more or less,
That's all right. I just wondered if, What about church when you were young? Did you go to church?
Yes, there was, when I was coming up, there were 2 churches in Hatteras Village.
Mm-hmm.
Down in the area where I live was the Assembly of God, which is there's still a church there in the same area, same spot. And then what we call the Up the Road Church, which was the Methodist Church, which is still in the same area, same spot, but just different buildings. Naturally there's not the same buildings. But yes, they were 2 churches, and another thing the kids would do when they were growing up, like I said, there was no money. And a lot of times we would all get together, all in the neighborhood, and say one of the parents would say, okay, y'all can cook candy here tonight.
Okay.
And we would go to someone's house, and we'd chip in and pool our money together. And we'd go buy a thing of cocoa and the milk and the sugar.
All the kids would do that?
Yeah. Because there wasn't no such thing as the parents having the money to say, well, I'll buy everything, y'all come here and cook it.
Right.
And we'd take what little bit of nickels and dimes and stuff like that we had. And we would go ahead and go to people's house, and we'd sit in all just young and sit around and talk and out on the front porch and stuff like that. And if there was enough money left over, we might buy some Pepsi-Colas and share them. But that was one of our activities that we done.
Okay. What kind of candies did you cook?
Well, chocolate fudge or peanut butter fudge. And boy, it used to taste the best.
I'll bet.
That was one of the things we done as something to do for kids. I mean, we didn't have cars to drive or anything like that, and we just had certain places that we'd gather. We'd walk everywhere that we went. And the old timers had some funny ways. You take around the fish houses, the girls and the women were allowed, more or less, unless it was a dying emergency. The girls in the family and the women, the wives, didn't go around there.
Nowhere near it?
No,
Why?
Well, the reason there was no indoor plumbing, or no plumbing period, no bathroom facility.
Oh.
And the men, a lot of times, they would be drinking or whatever. And when their bladder broke loose, they didn't, and the women just wasn't, you didn't do it. Now, I know my sister and my aunt, like when you go to where the theater is, there was a slash bridge, where there was a channel bass. Well, right where the channel bass is today used to be another beer place. It sold beer, and then the men would gather there to drink beer. Well, now my sister and my aunt, they weren't allowed past that slash bridge if they went to the movie on Saturday night, because the Horton's place, it was called, Mr. Horton Austin owned it, and he sold beer in there. Well, the men would gather there. There was no plumbing, and they would go out in the yard.
Oh, that's why they weren't allowed, because they would see the men doing that. Okay.
Things were a whole lot different back then than today. I mean, there was some things were just a no-no. Like people not married living together. My God, that a card and feathers, they'd run you out of town. You just didn't do stuff like that. But I don't know. It's just things have changed.
When people got married, what were the weddings like?
Well, when I got married, we went to Elizabeth City, got our license, and was married. Well, we got married by a minister, but it was in the minister's home. It wasn't in the church or nothing like that. I guess there was some church weddings, but there were very few. Most people just went off and got married because you couldn't get marriage license stuff here on the island.
Oh, you couldn't do that on the island. Okay.
You couldn't get marriage license and stuff like that. Like Manio, you could get them. I'm sure you could, but it seemed like when I was coming up and when I got married the first time, everybody just went to live in the city. And that would become the marriage capital of the world. You know, they were married. But everybody would go to live in the city, get their marriage license, and that was a 2-day ordeal, go here and live in the city.
And was it just the couple that would go? Or did the family go?
No, there was friends and stuff. I know when I got married, of course, my wife and I, and my sister, and then another couple, Danny and Iva, which were, you know, all of us grew up together, or Danny didn't. Danny was in the Navy. But Iva and my wife were real good friends. They grew up together. But we all got in the car and went to live in the city.
Oh, okay.
And we got married, and then we come back home. And, of course, the next day when we got back home, I went through all that, getting up there and getting it done. You couldn't get back in time to catch the ferry.
Okay.
Because a lot of times ferries quit running at night after dark. So, no, things were a whole lot different then. Now, I'm sure they was, well, my sister got married here in the Assembly of God Church. And I guess she went to Matty and got her license. I'm pretty sure her and Bill, that's where they had to in the county. But that was, it didn't happen every day. Most people would just go live in the city and get married. You know? Well, who could afford a big church wedding back then, too?
Sure.
You know, that's another thing. And when Susie and Bill got married in the Assembly of God Church in Hatteras, it wasn't a thing, but everybody got dressed, and we went down to the church, and they got married, and then they come back to the house, and everybody just sat around and talked, but there wasn't no such thing as setting up a big thing with refreshments and
no food or
party or nothing like that. Who could afford it?
Right.
You know,
Sure.
I mean, everybody got together in the yard and congratulations and talking and having, you know. But as far as a reception and, you know, no. She didn't have the money and her family didn't have. We didn't have the money, nobody in the family. And Bill's family, he was in the Coast Guard down here, and they were from up in Virginia. And they come down here for it, but I'm sure they didn't have the money to put on no big to-do either, so, you know.
So I guess there weren't any honeymoons then either.
Well, you honeymoon, but it wasn't like it is today. I'll tell you that. I guess, I know I took a day off from work, went and got married, and when I got back home, next day I was back to work. That was the end of the honeymoon. I mean, because you couldn't afford to miss no work, you know, what little bit of work there was. No, there wasn't no, we're going to the Bahamas or, you know, something like that, or we're going to Florida for our honeymoon or something like that. No, I'm sure people done that, but it wasn't in my neighborhood, I'll put it that way.
No one you knew.
Nobody I knew, anyway.
What about your grandma? You told me a lot about your grandfather.
Grandmama Lola I didn't know my biological grandmother.
Sure, but
my mother was only 5. Grandmama, she was Ernest Foster's sister, Captain Ernest, and Bill and all them that in the Albatross fleet. And Grandmama finally, in later years, she got a job and went to work in restaurants. But she basically stayed home, raised young'uns, kept the house clean. The one thing that sticks out in my mind is when I was growing up was Monday morning, regardless of the weather, was always wash day and bean day. The women, we had an old Ringer washing machine, as long as I can remember. Grandmama didn't have the scrub board no more. She had the Ringer washing machine. But we had a hand pump in the front yard for wash water. And my washing machine was on the back porch. So the boys had to go, before we went to school that morning, after we got our breakfast, we had to fill all them tubs and fill that machine with water. There wasn't no turn the spigot on and it fills up. But we had to make sure all that was done. And when we come home from dinner, there was always a pot of beans on Monday because the beans could cook while she was washing.
Oh, okay.
She could put a pot of beans on once in a while, go by and stir them, and you know, that sort of thing. So Monday, and that wasn't only in our house, that was the whole neighborhood, all the women. Monday was wash day. It was like a tradition. And they hung them on the line when they dried, they carried them in. And like on a Sunday, around our house, other than Grandmama fixing dinner and everything, you didn't do nothing on Sunday. If you wanted a blouse ironed or a dress ironed, or the boys, men, you know, wanted a shirt ironed, and everything was starting iron back in them days. It wasn't no wash and wire. You better have it done Saturday. Well, Granddaddy hardly ever raised his voice, but he better not catch you plugging the iron in. And Granddaddy wasn't a real religious church. I mean, he had his beliefs naturally, you know, but he wasn't a real religious church-going man. In fact, he was quite a character. he was a bird, Granddad was. But it was just, you didn't do things like that. Sunday was set aside for Sunday. And
well, what did you do then if there were no chores done?
Well, you went to church.
Which church did you go to?
I always went to the Assembly of God.
Okay.
That's where Grandmama went, and that's where it was close in the neighborhood, and everybody in our neighborhood, that's where we went. And you'd go to Sunday school. If you didn't stay for church, you had to go to Sunday school. Well, that...
you could like stop and get a drink or something.
No.
Okay.
You come back home, and then in the afternoon, everybody would, well, even the adults a lot of times would visit one another. They'd go around house to house walking. Well, the kids would all get together with their friends, and we'd all go walking. And maybe go to somebody's house to play. We used to go over there to Mr. Gilligan and Miss Neva's, right across Myrna Foster's house. Neva Gilligan and her husband, Mr. Gilligan, that was always what we called him. They used to have a croquet set. And all of us would get together and get in their front yard and play croquet on a Sunday evening. We might, all of us get together and go to the beach in a group. And the boys and the girls and everything, we might hold hands or something like that, but there wasn't no, I mean, you done that after, the sun better be down if you held hands, and much less because you didn't kiss one or walk arm in arm or nothing like that.
Right.
Them old folks were, they had their ways. But you could go to the beach and maybe do that. That was your fun. That was your relaxation. You know, you just what were you going to do? They wasn't nothing. You couldn't ride up and down the road, and you better not get caught drinking beer, even though we done it if we got a chance. But we more or less made our own fun. Things that we done, we had to make do with what we had. We'd go to somebody's house and play in the yard, play ball, like I say, play croquet, walk, go to the movies on a Saturday night, and they had the movie a lot of time on Sunday afternoon also. And where the hospital is now, the medical center in Hatteras, there were old girls clubs there. Whenever they could get enough people to help sponsor it, they had Monopoly and checkers and stuff like that. So a lot of times, especially in the wintertime, bad weather, you'd go there and you play that.
Okay.
Now, as far as actually sitting down and playing cards, there was sort of a dividing line there. That was like gambling, you know, Monopoly, checkers, stuff like that. But as far as, well, some women, some of the mothers and grandmothers and all didn't even allow a deck of cards in their house.
Really?
Now, the men would go to the docks and play poker. But they didn't do it at the house. My grandfather always had a poker game every Sunday afternoon. Now, you couldn't plug the iron in the house. But he'd go to the dock and play poker every Sunday evening. And that was really funny. He always had that poker game every Sunday afternoon in his fish camp where he kept his net stored. He had to take a boat and paddle across the creek to it. It was right across from where Foster's, the Albatross fleet is now, right across the creek. There where Evo
The little island?
Well, yeah, you can drive to it now, but right across from Willis Landing. And in fact, Evo Neal had a fish house there for a while.
I was going to ask about that.
Well,
That's
that was where my grandfather's camp was at. And Dr. Overby owns the property just south of where Willis Landing is, and there next to Foster's, where they kept their boats. And he kept a little skiff there, shelf skiff. And the men would go down there and they'd get in that skiff. And they'd go across the creek and play poker. And you kids did not go over there. I mean, that was another place, and they drank their whiskey over there, drank their beer over there, and there was no plumbing, so they went out the back door to do their thing. But young'uns, especially girls, you didn't go around there. That was it.
Yeah.
I mean,
What would happen when you did disobey?
oh, well, back then, if you got a whipping in school, you got another one when you got home, and the teacher didn't have to notify your parents or grandma or whatever. Now, the way it was around our house, Grandmama, she'd follow him and give me a whipping. Granddaddy had a few choice words that hurt more than the whipping, and he didn't abuse you. It wasn't an abuse.
Right. Discipline.
Discipline, well, that's the difference. What we used to call discipline, now they call abuse. And in my opinion, when they took it out of the schools and took prayer out of the schools, that's another thing. When we went to school, you said the Pledge of Allegiance, and you said it had a prayer. Every morning, I don't care, that was done just like it made no difference who you were, what you believed was, or nothing else. You had it. And if you sassed a teacher, she popped you. Now, they didn't mama you. They didn't abuse you. They let you know who the boss was.
Right.
That was it. I mean, it was plain and simple. For today's child abuse.
Right, sure.
You know.
Sure.
And I feel like a lot of our problems that we're having in our world today, when they took the discipline away from the teachers, and when they took the prayer out of the school, I know a lot of people in this world don't agree with me. That's the reason we have the society. But I think that brought on a whole lot of the problems that we've got today. And like a lot of these young people don't want to work. They've never been made to work.
Right.
They didn't have to. If they need something, their parents buy it for them. If they want something, their mom and daddy will go buy them a new car. Go up to the schoolhouse and look at the cars in the parking lot.
Right.
Well, you didn't see that when I was a kid because the parents didn't have the money. If you got a car when you got old enough to get one, you worked and paid for it. Mom and dad didn't have the money to do it. It was that simple, you know.
Right.
And so a lot of our modern day things in the world ain't all been for the good.
Right,
It's not all been for the good.
What else? Tell me a little bit more about school. Like what school was like when you were young.
Well, there was 3 grades. There was 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in one room, 4th, 5th, and 6th in the other room, and 7th and 8th was in the other room in the Hatteras school. And a lot of times we'll say, well, me and her are the same age. We went to school together. Well, they might be 2 years difference in our age. Because say I was in the 1st grade and so-and-so was in the 3rd. But we had some teachers that naturally wasn't from the island that moved down here. But we had several. I know Mrs. Inez Austin was one of them. Miss Hilda Bryan was another one. They born and raised here, and they went off and got teachers' educations and come back home and married and taught school here on the island. Anderson Midget's wife, she was a teacher around here. And like I say, them teachers, you learned basics. We didn't have the computers and stuff like that. And you learned reading, you learned writing, math. And down here, well, if you went to high school, you had to go to Boxington. And of course, then they built a new school, but in combined.
Was it common for the kids to go to high school in Boxington?
A lot of them did, but there was a great majority of them who didn't. A lot of them, when they were no later than 16 years old, just quit school.
And why do you think that was? Was it because it was inconvenient to go to Boxington, or because they wanted to go and work?
Well, a lot of them wanted to work. Some of them had to. I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to get out and go to work. I was just hard-headed, and I wanted to. I wanted to make my own. I was just young and dumb, you know. And I regretted not finishing school many a time, even though the education wasn't nothing like it is today. It would be a whole lot more than what I got, because I only went to 7th grade. So.
Right. That's all right, yeah.
So, anyhow, That's one of them things too. But a lot of people would quit school and go to work. They were very, well, you look at the graduation class and some of the old photos, and some of them were right good solid classes, but there were a lot of them that they were 2 or 3 years difference between them.
Okay.
And that graduated at the same time because of the way the education system was. I mean, they just, some people, a lot of times the girls would get married before they finished high school when they were anywhere between 16 and 18 years old. Back then, there's an old saying or an old joke that's come up here in recent years. Back then, when you were 21 years old, if you wasn't already married, you was an old maid. Now you're smart.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was just a way of life.
Sure. So most of the women then did get married before age 20, would you say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, most of them before they were 20 years old, yeah. In fact, I know some women, my aunt was one. They got married, and before they finished high school, they wanted to finish high school. But they were married, and in their senior year, they were married women.
And but they still went to school.
But they still went to school. Some of them had that desire to finish. And even though they were married, they still graduated. But they were married before they were finished high school.
Wow.
My aunt that lives over here, Irene Bassinet, she was married before she finished high school, but she wanted to finish high school. But I think she was the only one in our family that did finish high school. Only one that I can think of. Yeah, Irene was the only one in my mother's brothers and sisters, and then when me and my sister were being raised down there with my grandparents, neither one of us finished school. It's stupid, but that's the way it was.
Well, yeah, but it's hard. You can't really pass judgments on. That was just the way of life.
Yeah.
So.
Well, when I retired, I was captain on a tug and only had a 7th grade education.
Sure.
And I'm not going to say that I didn't need an education, but I did manage to make it to captain.
Right.
And in the working class on the boats, that's all you're going to get. You ain't going to hire a captain.
Right.
Unless you go in the office or something, you know.
Right.
But as far as working on the tugs itself, you ain't going to hire a captain. That's as high as you can go.
Right.
So, and I made good money. I made a decent living, but I had to be gone to do it.
Sure.
And nowadays, there's people around here there's people working at the ferry dock now that have got better retirement than I ended up with by being gone working on the tugs, merchant marine. That's how much that them jobs have changed over the years. I was talking to Barry Austin. In fact, we spoke about it this morning. He might be retiring here shortly. And he can go out with just his state retirement alone on about $1,800 a month, he was telling me.
Wow.
I didn't get that much out of my tugboat retirement. I can tell you that. I was there 30 years.
Right.
So the things have changed to where that's like I'm saying about the opportunity being here now. Why don't they take advantage of it?
Sure.
Some of these people that retire from down there to that ferry dock are coming out with some real good retirements. And if they put it together with their Social Security, most of them, their children are grown and gone. You know, they're on their own, so homes are paid for by then. They live like kings and save money, you know. But that wasn't that way when I was coming up. That opportunity wasn't here. You know, it wasn't here.
Sure. Did your grandmother get into doing any home remedies? What medical stuff like? Do you remember anything that she would do?
Well, yeah. Vicks and castor oil.
Vicks and castor oil?
I remember that very much, and I got a scar on my hand right now, my left hand. It's still there. That's been there since I was a young boy. I was out in the yard playing, and I'd